Long time ago, as Indian people are starting to make contact with American people, there were incidents where Indians would trade things with a trader who was a non-native person. For example, they might take their animal hides there and they would take them to this fur trader, and then he would give them goods. And so whatever the Indians needed, that's what he would give them. Maybe it's cloth or maybe it's food or something like that. And after a while, the fur trader thought he could trick Indians. And so what these fur traders would do was they would give these Indians some alcohol. These fur traders would look at the hides and they would say, okay, I need to think about how much these hides are worth. So while you're waiting, why don't you have a drink of this drink and sit and in the meantime, I'll figure out what your hides are worth. And this drink was alcohol. So as the Indians would drink it, yeah, it tasted really bad and made them cough, but something about this alcohol appealed to them, even though it tasted horrible. A lot of these Indians, not all of them, but a lot of them, wanted more because they were starting to feel something. They started to feel a sensation and they liked it and they wanted to feel more of that. And next thing you know, they're drunk and hollering around and then the fur trader will say, okay, what do you boys want? I can give you this. And then they would say, oh, we want more of this drink. And so the fur trader would say, okay, I can give you this drink for these furs. And so they would say, okay, so that's what they did. So the Indians walked out of there with alcohol and no food and no clothes and no goods. Whatever they needed, they didn't have it because they only wanted the alcohol. So they get home to their camps with their alcohol, and their wives and children are disappointed because maybe they were expecting certain things. And now here is their husbands and fathers, and they're all acting weird and strange, and they're falling over each other, and they're dizzy, and maybe they want sex, and the wife doesn't, and so he rapes his woman. Or maybe a man is raping somebody else's woman. Domestic violence is coming into picture, and it looks really bad. And this is what happened. It happened in Canada and happened all over North America. It happened in Mexico too with the Indians down there. Spanish Mexicans did the same thing to the Indians in Mexico. So, as time goes a little bit forward, next comes the reservation time, where Indians are put on reservations, and in the beginning, they were prison camps and they couldn't leave and they were not allowed to hunt. They were not allowed to have anything sharp, no weapons, no guns, no bows and arrows, no spears, nothing. And a lot of tribes are hunter-gatherer tribes. And so they're always moving around. They're roaming. They have different camps according to the season. There's a summer camp, there's a winter camp, and so forth. They're following the migration routes of buffalo or deer or elk or fish or whatever. They're always moving different locations, and now they're on reservations and they can't move around. And on the reservations, the traditional governments were no longer recognized by the American government. And as such, the chiefs were now considered normal people by the American government, and this made it really difficult for traditional government to continue. And the American cavalry, they organized certain Indians that wanted to be in a police force to police the reservation. And the good warriors, they didn't want to be any part of this because they were more for the traditional form of government. So they didn't want to join the police force. However, the troublemakers, They had no chance at causing trouble in a Tioshbaya government. But now that Tioshbaya doesn't exist anymore. So now they have an opportunity to rise above the chiefs. So the troublemakers were the ones who joined the police, and they were given guns so they could terrorize the chiefs and other former traditional leaders. And so now Lakota society is really, really turning upside down. There's no traditional government. They can't leave the reservation. They can't hunt. They cannot do the things that they normally did. And another thing that was happening on the reservation was it was now illegal to speak your language and to do the ceremonies. This was documented on April 10th, 1883. So they couldn't speak their language, they couldn't do their ceremonies, and this is affecting the body physically and spiritually and emotionally. Everything is going topsy-turvy for Native people during this time. Again, this is the late 1800s and early 1900s. And as I said, alcohol is becoming a problem. And during this time period, the native world is just going topsy-turvy because everything about our lifestyle is starting to disappear. The traditional government is going away. The Tioshbaya system of living is starting to erode. Men can no longer do the things that they normally do. For example, in fulfilling their role in the society. They cannot hunt. They cannot provide for their families. They are not able to be men. And this is causing frustration. And a lot of times the men, they turn to alcohol to deal with that because there's nothing on the reservation. There's nothing for them to do. There's no jobs. Here's an example. In the early reservation time period, the reservations were divided up into parcels of land, about 160 acres, and every family was given a parcel to live on. The government paid for log cabin to be built. Every family got a cow and a team of horses, a wagon, and seeds to grow crops. Even though many tribes are not agricultural, yet America wanted everybody to be farmers. And they stopped dressing in the traditional clothes because they couldn't hunt. We get our traditional clothes from animals. And that was done in a respectful way, by the way. Whenever they went hunting, they would always say a prayer of apology in taking. But they only took what they needed. They never took excess. They only took what they needed, and they always give something back to the nature. And they offered sacrifices of themselves as a way of apology and thanksgiving, so that we could have our food and that our clothes and even our homes comes from the animals. Well, all of that was gone. So they had no choice but to wear the clothes that the American government gave to them. So they started looking like farmers. And at the same time, the medicine people, the spiritual people, the healers, the holy women and holy men and medicine women and medicine men were all taken away and put into a mental asylum in Canton, South Dakota. This place was horrible because once they got sent there, they were not coming back. They were going to die there. And so the people on the reservations had nowhere to turn for their spiritual needs or their emotional needs because all the healers were in a mental asylum. They were all forced there. They were locked up. So the native people no longer had access to healthy foods that their bodies need. As a result, they're developing illnesses like diabetes and hypertension and other heart problems, because the food they're given from the American government is all unhealthy. And this is how we're hit physically. And as I said, the spiritual people and the healers were locked up into a mental institution because our ceremonies were also illegal. They couldn't develop spiritually. So now we're spiritually hit as well. And, as I said, our languages were made illegal. We couldn't speak them in public. So now we're hit emotionally. And since every family was given a parcel of land, we were all split apart from each other. Now our Tioshbae system is starting to fall apart because we don't see each other all the time. It's a very depressing time. Very depressing. So, the next thing that comes into play is that every reservation was allowed to have one church denomination. And so, priests started coming to the reservations and they saw that the Indians were weak spiritually, physically, and emotionally, which means that they're also weak mentally. Because in the Lakota way, the body is consisted of 4 parts: the physical part, the mental part, the emotional part, and the spiritual part. If one of those parts becomes weak or neglected, or somebody is only focusing on one part and neglecting the other 3, that person becomes sick. That person becomes an addict. And this is what was happening. And the priest saw this and saw that, hey, we can brainwash these people easy. And the friendly word is to convert them. But really, it's brainwashing. And that's what happened on the reservations. And the sad thing is that it worked. So if you go to a reservation, any reservation in America or Canada, 90% or more are either Christian or they're Christian influenced today. So it worked. We are not like our ancestors today. Very few of us are like our ancestors today. And so during this time period, Native people are starting to think in a different way. We're not thinking like our ancestors. Now we're thinking in terms of I, me, that I am more important than others. We're not thinking like a community anymore. We are losing that community perspective. So now we start to compete against each other. And like I said, a lot of times Indians had problems dealing with this. And whatever money they had, they would turn to alcohol as a way to forget, as a way to not feel any pain, which is sad because they're becoming addicts, not only to alcohol, but they're going in denial. Because in the Lakota way, one of the reasons to live is to develop emotionally. That there is a time for sadness, there is a time for anger, there is a time to be scared, and there's a time to be happy. These 4 states are not meant to be states that we live in all the time. The goal is not to be happy, the goal is to be at peace. And that begins within yourself. So all these emotions, they're part of learning experiences. And learning leads to wisdom and knowledge, and those are blessings. So yeah, there is a time to hurt, but we learn from it, and we learn to appreciate what's important. And these are blessings. We can grow stronger from that as long as we learn from it and make the best out of those situations that we can. Then it's not a mistake, then it's not a bad thing, as long as we work on it. But during this early reservation time period, people were not doing that. And instead of trying to make the best of the situation, they were so fed up with things that a lot of people turned to alcohol, which made the problem even worse. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that Native people and many Asian people, we are missing an enzyme in our bodies that other people in this world have. And one of the side effects to this is that it's much easier for Asian people and Native people to become alcoholic to become addicted to alcohol. And this is what happened. And along comes with that is things like domestic violence, rape, child molestation. The family system is just falling apart. And then people from the East form organizations to help Indians, and one of their ideas resulted in what's called the boarding school experience, where children were taken away from their families, mostly by force, and sent to these boarding schools that were hundreds of miles away. And when they got there, they were told their families were dead. They were told that this is the only place for them. One of the reasons why the boarding school was created was to civilize Indian people. And the American government felt that the best way to civilize the Indians was to take the youngest ones away from their people and brainwash them to civilize them. Now we're against each other. Is that civilized? To be against each other? See what I mean? So, in these schools, they experienced a lot of abuse. And the older children, the older Native children, to deal with this, they became abusers themselves. They abused the younger children. And now comes a cycle of abuse. And it starts with these boarding school children. It's really sad. And in these schools, you would get tortured for speaking your language or even talking about where your reservation is, where your home is. You get tortured for that. So they're going through a heck of a lot of abuse and a lot of emotional damage. And many of these children died in these schools. And as I'm making this recording, the day's date is the 25th of May, 2022. And by this time in Canada, for example, many unmarked graves were discovered. And thousands of bones were found of little children. These are those children that were killed in these boarding schools. And the same thing happened in America. They're finding bones in unmarked graves in a lot of boarding schools in America as well. This is a testament of the abuse of this horrible time. Those who survived, they grew up and become adults, and they don't want their children to experience what they went through, so they didn't teach them the language. They didn't talk about the culture. And many of them didn't know it anyway, because they were sent to these boarding schools when they were little children. When you look at an old person today, let's say somebody is 80 years old today, do the math. It's the year 2022 that I'm making this recording. Go back 80 years to when this old person was born. That would be what? 1942? Yeah. In 1942, most of the Indians on the reservation were Christian. When this old person was born, he was born into a Christian family. His parents were trying to be Christian. They went to church every Sunday. They prayed in the Christian way. They sang Christian songs. When you look at an elder today, most likely that person was born in Christianity. They are not the connection to the ancient past. Those people are gone. They were gone in the 1890s. So when somebody says, I was raised by my elders, that means they were raised by Christians. That doesn't mean anything. So, add up everything that I've said so far. This is the beginning of the reservation. Look at how horrible and upside down and topsy-turvy the native world became when the reservation period started. Our traditional governments were no longer recognized, and in place we were given a government from Washington, D.C. that's based on the federal government in Washington, D.C. So when you look at tribal governments today, these are not traditional. These are people that are very similar to what we are complaining about in Washington, D.C. People say, the leaders don't care for the people. They only care for themselves. That's the same fact on reservations. Tribal governments are the same way. Tribal leaders and other politicians, they just care for their family and friends. They don't care for the whole tribe. This is a truth. And whatever money comes to the reservation, they keep it to themselves. The leaders keep it to themselves. This is why on most reservations you have 90% unemployment. We are living in the third world on the reservations. 10% are controlling the wealth. And they want to keep it that way. They don't want to return to the traditional way of government because in the traditional way, there's no rich people and there's no poor people. But in today's tribal government, there are the really rich and the really poor. There's no in between. Tribal government is the biggest problem today for us Native people. It's not the American government, it's the tribal government. See, this thinking of, I gotta keep it for myself, not for them. See, this us against them thinking. That's not the Native way. It's not the Lakota way. But that's the way we learned it. We became selfish. And for the poor people, they turn to alcohol. What little money they get, most of them turn to alcohol and drugs, especially today. But back then it was alcohol. So there were a lot of families that had a lot of alcohol abuse going on. Then the social services comes into the picture and says, we gotta save these Indian children. And the best way to save them is to send them to white people. So you add all these things together. And this is how the reservations developed in a very unhealthy way. So social services comes into the picture and they feel that the best way to help these children in these alcoholic homes is to take them out and adopt them to white people. And that's what happened. They would wait around the time when the poor families get their assistance checks and they get whatever government check it is, and it's always a assistance check, okay? Not all Indians get that. A lot of people misunderstand that today. They all think we all get checks from the government and we don't have to pay our bills. It's not true. It would be nice, but no, it's not true. Yeah, we have to pay our bills and we have to pay our taxes. Yes, we are taxpayers too. For those of you that don't believe that, we are. Google it. Research it. We pay taxes too. Okay, anyway. So the social services would wait until that day when the poor families get their assistance checks because they know they're going to get drunk and they're not going to pay their bills because these checks are supposed to be to pay bills and to buy food and things like that. But a lot of the alcoholic homes, they don't spend the money that way. And the social services, they're the ones that are giving those checks out. Yeah. So they know when Indians are going to get drunk. So they wait until that time period, and then when the time is right, then they go into the home and say, look at that, you guys are drunk, so we're taking your kids. And they take them and send them out, and nobody knows where they end up. So a lot of these kids were taken by force and adopted out to white families, Christian families. So these children grew up and they're called the lost generation. They don't know where they come from. A lot of these kids, they didn't even know they were Indian. Some of them thought they were Mexican. Some of them thought they were something else. They didn't realize they were Indian. Some of them still don't know. This is what happened. It's horrible. Think about that. And sometimes these children were taken and the parents weren't even drunk. Maybe the parents are not alcoholics. Maybe they're just struggling, and the social service comes and says, hey, you guys are too poor to keep your children, and so we're going to take them away from you. So they would take them away. So alcohol was not always part of the picture, but in most cases it was. And this is really a sad thing when you think about it. Then, in 1978, several things happened that were supposed to be good things for Indian people. We never received apologies from the government for these things that happened. But instead, the American government came up with some new laws. One of them was called the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978. And this law proclaimed that it is now okay for Indians to speak their language in public and to do their ceremonies. I laugh because when America was declaring independence from England back in the 1700s, one of the things they said was they are going to be a land that has freedom of religion. But not for Indians. Just for white people. Yeah? So that's why in 1978 there was a law that said, okay, now you Indians can do your ceremonies and speak your language. And when America is supposed to be land of the free, yeah? Sure. Oh man, it's just ridiculous when you think about it. Of course, people still spoke their language, they just did it at home. And some did the ceremonies, but they did them way out in the country. But even then, the people who did the ceremonies, they were still Christian influenced. Yeah, so they're still not like the ancestors. They still were Christian influenced. And they spoke the language in a Christian-influenced way too. And then a second law was created called the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978. And this law stated that Native children are no longer to be adopted out to non-Native families. But there is a criteria that it set. That when a child has no home, there's a criteria that the social services is required to follow. The first attempt is to put the child in a relative's home. If that's not possible, then the child can be adopted by another Native family in the same tribe, yeah, but somebody who's not related. But another family from the same tribe can adopt this child. If that's not possible, then a family from another Native tribe can adopt this child. And if that's not possible, then comes the last resort, that any non-Native family has the opportunity to adopt this Native child. That's the law. But there's a saying among Indian people that since when does America keep its laws? Since when does America keep its treaties? And this has resulted in a lot of cases where social services went against the law and continued to put Native children into non-Native homes. Think about that. After everything I just said, think about that. Now, I want to say one more thing concerning this Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978, is that another good thing about this law was that any child who was adopted before 1978, that child's adoption records were now to be made public to the relatives and family of that child. So when somebody knows that, hey, I had a nephew that was adopted out back in the 1960s. I'm going to social services and give them all my identification, And by law, social services has to tell that person where this child was adopted to, so they can find their lost relatives. That's the good thing. The uncomfortable thing is that when these lost generation were found and they were brought back to the reservation, they didn't fit. They didn't fit anywhere. That's what's really sad. Imagine that. You are a little child. Maybe you're 3 months old. You're adopted out to a non-native family. Maybe they treat you good. Maybe you grow up in a nice way. And then your relative finds you in 1978. And let's say you're 15 years old. And then this new law, the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978, is saying, okay, now you have to come with me. Yeah, your relative is telling you, okay, now you have to come with me. You don't know your biological family. All you know is the family you were adopted into. They loved you. They took care of you. They helped you. They helped you learn to deal with difficulty. And now you're leaving what you know is home, and you have to go into an environment you know nothing about. But at the same time, where you grew up, let's say you were the only Indian kid in a white town of 3,000 people. That's a small town, okay? Population of 3,000 people. And you're the only Indian in that town, and all your life you experienced discrimination. People called you a prairie nigger. People called you a fucking Indian. People told you all you're going to ever be when you grow up is a lazy, drunk Indian. You heard that all your life. So you didn't really fit there either. Your family loved you. You grew to love them because that's all you know. But yet, in that town, you still experience discrimination, racism, so you don't fit. And now, your relative uses this law to find you and says, now you come home with me. Now you're going to the reservation. And you don't know a damn thing about the reservation. You've never heard your language. You don't know your culture. You don't fit in anywhere. It's just like those boarding school kids, the ones who lived through it. When they graduated from high school, from these boarding schools, they couldn't even get jobs because they were Indian. Nobody in white America wanted to hire an Indian because they're dirty heathen savages. So they didn't fit in. When they went back to the reservation, they didn't fit in there too because they didn't grow up there. Some of the reservation Indians would say, geez, you act like a white guy. Why don't you go back to your white people? They faced discrimination from their own people. That's what happened to a lot of boarding school kids in the early 1900s. And this is the same experience that these adopted kids started to feel after 1978. When they were returned to their reservations, their families went after them. They found them. That law made it possible for the relatives to find their adopted children. They brought them back, and these children didn't fit. Think about this. What is the solution to this? Is it really better? I think the most important thing is that reality begins within. Within, we are not native, we are not white, we are not Japanese, we are not black. We are human. The number one thing, we all bleed red. We all need earth, wind, fire, and water to live. This is the most important thing. Culture is not a part of it. Culture is where you grow up, where you learn things. Love has no skin color. Same thing for spirituality. It has no language. It has no color. Your inside has no language. It has no color. This is the most important thing. This is the foundation of who we are, of who we become. This is the foundation that helps us to learn as we live our life, whether we make bad choices or good choices. The important thing is that we learn. Then it's not a mistake. But it gave us knowledge and wisdom. Those are blessings. And that helps us to appreciate what's really important. And when a really nice time happens, we can enjoy it even more. And we learn to communicate in a healthy way, a clear and healthy way, without judgment. And we learn to listen to one another and respect one another and not try to force our beliefs down each other's throats, but learn to agree to disagree and still have peace. It's all about peace. Peace has no skin color, has no language, has no race, has no religion. This is what's important. Every situation is different. That's another thing too. You can't put all these adopted children in the same boat and say, okay, you all get in that boat and you're all going back to the reservation island because that's where you belong. You can't say that. They didn't grow up there. They have no connection there. You can't force something onto somebody, especially if they're not ready for it. It's a nice thought, yeah? We reclaim our lost generation. But are they able to do that? Do they want to be reclaimed? Look at it from their perspective. That's why I said, imagine this happened to you. You're 3 months old. You're Indian kid. You get adopted out to a white family in Florida. That's where you grew up. You experience some racism, but you learn how to deal with it. Maybe you have a really good mother and father that help you to deal with it so that you learn from it and grow from it and become strong. You learn to transform this problem into a learning tool, and it makes you very healthy emotionally. Does this have anything to do with culture or skin color or religion or race? No, it doesn't. This is what you learn as your home. That's your mother. That's your father. You call them that because that's all you know. They loved you. They took care of you. And now at 15 years old, some relative from the reservation finds you and they say, okay, now they took the people that you know as mom and dad, they took them to court and they won. And now they have to allow your relative to take you back to the reservation. And you don't know a damn thing about it. When you look at a situation, you got to look at all perspectives, not just yours. Because our tendency to say is, yeah, the Indians belong with Indians. Yeah, the poor thing, he should go back to his people because they still have their culture and their beautiful ceremonies and language. All sounds good on paper. But what about that kid? What about what he thinks? That's the most important thing. See, what happened to Indian people on the reservation? We had no choice. Nobody came to us and said, well, how can we help you Indians succeed on this reservation? No, they didn't ask us that. They said, okay, you Indians gotta go to church. You Indians gotta go to boarding school. You Indians have to do this. You must do that. We were told what to do all the time. Nobody asked us, how can we help you? Anyway, getting back to this topic of adopting Native kids, is that nobody ever asked these kids what they think. Nobody did. And I think that's disrespectful to them. Yeah, it's disrespectful. How can you say you're helping somebody when you don't even ask them? How can we help you? Tell me what you think. I'm here to listen to you. Not just hear you, but listen to you with my heart and my mind and my soul. I want to listen to you so that I know if I can help you, I'll do the best job that I can to help you. And maybe you can help me too. That is connection. That's communication. I think that's what laws should be like. Instead of just saying, okay, this is the way it's going to be, and so you got to do it like that. I don't care what you think. See what I mean? I think when they made this Indian Child Welfare Act, they should have asked these children, what do they think? And remember what I said earlier, I think the most important thing is making your foundation. Yeah, and about learning from difficulty, learning to make the best out of any difficult situations as best as you can, and learning from it, and learning to see what's really important, and respecting what other people choose to believe, and not forcing your ideas down each other's throats, and learning to agree to disagree. We have to have this foundation within ourselves of peace. We achieve that by learning from difficulty, that we can appreciate the blessings, the good times, even more than we did before. When we do this, it reflects in our communication. How we treat other people is how we treat ourselves. It all goes back to reality begins within. This is Mitakuya Oyasing. Everything inside of you is connected, just like you are connected to everything around you. That's the complete definition. Most people just focus on half of that. They say, we're all related, all my relations. They don't realize that it goes inside of you too. That's the most important thing. That you have your foundation, that you are developing in an emotional way so that you can develop spiritually. And this helps you have clarity. This has nothing to do with being Indian. It has everything to do with being a healthy human. That's the most important thing. This is how we open our communication, our direct line communication with our grandmother Earth. This is how we can hear her voice. It has nothing to do with sweat lodge ceremonies and sun dances and having a pipe. That's not important. The most important thing is that you are grounded, that you are balanced, that you have peace. The ceremonies don't give you that. They might nurture it, but you have to build it. Maybe you could say that's the human culture, that you are grounded, that you are balanced. Now take that thought. Let's say you're a non-native parent and you've adopted a native child. Use that thought. Don't force that child's culture on him. Let him be a boy. Let her be a girl. And you be a mother or a father. Focus on those things first. Because if you push something onto that child, you're doing the same thing the American government has done to Indian people on the reservations by telling them what to do, by telling them what is right. This is called paternalism. And it's also ethnocentrism, which leads to racism and dogma. This is all unhealthy things. And you don't want to be that to any of your children, whether they are adopted or biological. They are your children. So be a parent. Don't be an Indian parent. Don't be a white parent. Just be a parent. Be a mother. Be a father. That's what that child needs. If the child develops an interest in his culture, then go with that child. Ask that child. Always ask that child. Don't be thinking, he's just a kid, he doesn't know any better. At some stage that's true, but once that child begins to talk and think and comprehend, then you better start asking. That shows that you respect that child. If you expect your child to respect you, you respect your child too. I've seen situations where a non-native mother had a biological son, half native, half non-native, and this non-native mother was saying, oh, you got to do this, son, because you're from this tribe, so you got to do this, because part of you is Indian, so you got to do this. This child heard this over and over and over, and the child ended up wanting to be somebody from a total different culture. It really backfired in a crazy way. So don't force things. Really think about it before you say, well, we want to incorporate some Winnebago ideas into our family because one of our family members is a Winnebago Indian. So, because if you do that, you're singling out one over the other. Number one thing, Indians are not better than anybody else. We are human beings. We are not any more special than anybody else. We are human beings. Our ancestors called themselves Ikche-Oyate, the human nation. They never said we were the Lakota Oyate. We said Ikche-Oyate. So let the child be a child. Let him be a boy. Let her be a girl. Or whatever the child is within themselves. Let the child develop. Nurture it. But don't force it. As he or she gets older, listen even more. Part of being a parent is listening. Unfortunately, most parents are not that way today. They only hear what they want to hear. They're not really listening to their children. And to single out one child just because it's native, you're already nurturing that child to become emotionally unstable. And you don't want that. Because you're indirectly giving that child unrealistic expectations. And that only creates stress. And the child will probably have more problems when it becomes older than if you just let the child be a child. Don't put race in the picture. Don't put culture in the picture. Put love in the picture. Love has no race, as I said earlier. This is not a perfect world, and it was not meant to be a perfect world. Perfection is an illusion created by duality. Duality is when you take something and look at it and only choose the good parts and say the rest is bad. Then you create a good versus evil concept. And that's basically what religion is founded upon. And then you say, well, my way is the only way. It's the best way. Yes, you have dogma. You say, my culture is better than yours. You have ethnocentrism. You start saying, if you only do things the way I do things, then things will be better for you because I'm better than you. Paternalism. All these things are unhealthy. And you don't want to do this to your child because you can do this in a way that is tricky. You might think you're doing this out of love. That's what you think. But maybe you should use your heart too. Because we have a heart and we have our brains. We have to use them both. They need each other. They're equally important. If you use just one, you're going to have problems. If you only do things by the heart, you will have problems. If you only do things by the mind, you will have problems. One, you become an oppressor. The other, you become a victim. And you don't want to do that to your child. This is not love. Love includes really actively listening to the other. When it comes to families, mothers, fathers, listen to your children. When you do that, you're teaching them how to listen. Isn't that cool? If you want them to listen to you, you listen to them first. That's how they learn it. Don't use fear. Fear is an illusion, but people use it, and it only creates problems. So this adoption is a very tricky topic because every situation is different. Some are bad situations, some are good situations. Just trust in love. The child will come to its culture when it's ready. Don't force it. I know a very beautiful story. I'm not going to say the name or the tribe or anything. But I know a very nice story where a young guy was adopted out as a baby, and his family was wonderful to him. They listened to him. They didn't force anything on him. They just let him be a boy. And he became a healthy young man. And then he started to dream. Very interesting dreams. The dreams came to him. He woke up and he was like, wow, that's amazing. This is what I mean when I say trust in love. There's something out there, people. It's not God. It's not the Holy Ghost. But there is something out there. Some things, I should say. And we can come in contact with them through the dreams, in the dream world. And in the awake world too. But for a lot of people, it happens in dreams. When you are ready, it will come to you. Just like what happened to this young man. Now he's learning his language because he's ready for it. Nobody forced him to it. He has no regrets. Now he's ready. See, if his parents had forced him, said, okay, we're going to enroll you in your Indian language class and you better get an A and all this kind of thing because you're an Indian. If they did that, it would have driven him away and he would probably never want to be an Indian. You trust in love. Dreams are part of that. This guy was ready, and it came to him naturally. Don't force things on children. Listen to them. Talk to them. Celebrate with them. Help them, guide them through difficulty so that they learn how to do it themselves as they get older. This is love. And when they're ready for something, it will come. It will happen. Let it be. You do not have that right to push it on them, because that's disrespect, and that is not love. I say these things to you based on the Lakota Star Knowledge perspective. All I ask is that you just think about it. Nothing more. And I'm very thankful to be talking to you. And I wish all of you a good night, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're listening to this. And I will catch you in the next video. We have no word for goodbye in our language because everything is circular. There's no beginning, there's no end. So we say, until next time, which in Lakota is Noksha Ake. To learn more about Lakota spirituality, I have written a book called Wichocha Otechike. This book also includes Lakota Star Knowledge information. All the videos that I make, which are about Lakota spirituality, Lakota Star Knowledge, and cultural information, are based on this book. This book costs 99 American dollars. This price includes the shipping cost as well as a tracking number. And to learn more about Lakota language, I have written a Lakota language book called Chante Etanha Owoglake, Speaking from the Heart. And all my Lakota language videos are based on this book. This book costs 119 American dollars. This price includes the shipping cost as well as a tracking number. I also teach online and I give spiritual consultations as well. If you are interested in any of my services and products, you can send payment via PayPal to my email address, which is hehaka7@yahoo.com. That's HEHAKA, the number 7@yahoo.com. When you send your payment, please include your shipping address and your email address. Lila Pilamaelo. Thank you very much.